1 week season.
And welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab presented by 1 week season as always. And we are coming to you here on this Friday, September 27th. And week 4 is upon us here. So excited to dive into this one. As always, I'm your host, Cheeseman, here with you in the DFS lab 4 days a week. And if you find value in this content, if you could give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, we would appreciate that. And with that, Papy, how you doing, man? How was week 3 for you?
Week 3 was a solid week, a small win. I cashed in the Wildcat again by the skin of my teeth. I think it was like 980th or something like that. The second two out of 3 weeks I've done that. And then had another lineup in the power sweep that also cashed because it had Jennings. I don't think it really deserved to cash. It was a lineup full of snow in Jennings, basically. But, you know, he got it done on his own this week.
It's yeah, I mean, sometimes you just kind of take those, you know. I mean, I had that in week 1 where I had a couple lineups that finished pretty close to the top and didn't really think they had a chance, and then a late touchdown by Jerome Ford. So yeah, but it is weird when you have lineups with the snowflakes and then like Jennings and Dak basically give you half your points. Yeah, for me, week 3 was I had a lot of exposure to that Dallas and Baltimore game, but just did not have any Derrick Henry. Embarrassed to say, completely faded him. So that was a mistake. But we move on, man. And week 4 is here. And so another chance to take a crack at this. Let's talk real quick about the injuries. A lot of injuries, including some ones that have popped up on the slate that we weren't expecting. They popped up Thursday. Marvin Harrison Jr., he popped up with a quad injury. Nico Collins is someone who has recently popped up on the injury report. There's a huge list. We won't list every single one of them off. We'll leave that to you guys. And then you also had Deontay Johnson added as a non-participant on Thursday with a groin injury. Tank Dell also popped up in there. He's now looking like he might be out. So, I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about all the situations. What ones stand out to you right now as ones we really need to be monitoring heading into the weekend?
Yeah, so we ran through the list of injuries, you know, before we got on, and it's long. So there's a whole long list of players where it's, you know, up in the air whether or not they're going to play or be limited or what they're going to do this week. I think the main ones are Nico Collins. To me, is a big one for this slate. He's a desirable player, you know, in that game against a weak defense where Tank Dell, who you said is probably going to be out, I think is the way it's looking right now. That already condenses the targets down, you know, and makes Nico more desirable. And then you'd say, okay, well, if Nico were to miss, you know, Diggs would become almost a lock button type play. I mean, if you think about Mixon being out too, it would be like everybody is hurt. You know, he's the last man standing. So you have to think in a Nico misses scenario that Diggs sees 10 to 15 targets. I mean, you have to think he's a favorite to see 10 to 15 targets. And so it would be difficult to get off of him, you know, at his price in most leagues. I mean, I'm assuming his ownership would be very high, which would be the only reason to really stay away. But, you know, sometimes you just have to eat the ownership, like a situation like that. So I think that's a big one. And then Deontay Johnson, the other one, you know, that I think is big. If he were to miss, you have a lot of cheap receivers in Carolina that would become the starters. And so I think you'd almost have a pick your cheap Carolina receiver type week. You know, who do you want to guess gets the ball? One of them is going to get it. So it would become very interesting. You know, do you pick a cheap Carolina receiver on every roster, or do you say, well, these guys could just be bad, and so I'm gonna just hope they brick and fade it. But it would be difficult not to play a Jonathan Mingo at, I think he's 3.3. Difficult to stay away, you know, without Johnson playing.
Exactly. Yeah, like you said, the targets have to go somewhere there. Yeah, the other one that I'll just mention is, and it's not quite as impactful as the ones you mentioned, but still definitely significant, is George Kittle. He was limited both Wednesday and Thursday with a hamstring. Again, a soft tissue injury, always tough to come back from those and always the risk for re-injury. But if he were to play, that's an upgrade to the 49ers running game just because he's so important in their blocking schemes. And obviously he would certainly be a weapon they would look at as well. So that's another one. But again, check out wherever you go for your sources in terms of injuries and monitor it heading into this week. And it's going to be important to keep an eye and be up to date on what's happening as we head towards the weekend. So let's take a look at ownership now, as we always do here, Pappy. Here's the ownership on oneweekseason.com. Anything that stands out to you with this initial look? As it's Friday morning, and so things could definitely change, but this is initially what we have here.
Yeah, so with all the injury stuff, you got to think things will probably change a little bit when we get some clarity. But I think the first thing that really stands out to me here is seeing that Mason is still projected to be overwhelmingly the chalkiest player. I mean, it's like people just cannot get enough of Mason, and it makes sense. I was not on him last week. Really, the Kittle injury was what kind of made me not want to play Mason as much, because Kittle is so important for their running game. And being out really makes a difference there. Now this week, again, his health is up in the air. I think if Kittle plays, I will be more interested in Mason. But it's not a great matchup. The Patriots have been relatively tough defensively, and he's starting to creep up there in price. I mean, he's 6,700. He hasn't had a huge role in the passing game. So, at what point do people say, like, okay, well, he's finally appropriately priced? I kind of feel like he's not as of an obvious value this week as he kind of was the previous couple. So I don't know. To me, that feels high. Like I will almost certainly be underweight that ownership percentage if he ends up being that high. So I think that's one thing that stands out to me, is just, again, how chalky Mason continues to be. And that's not to say he won't have a good game. He obviously could, but I just think that's a little aggressive, being up around 37% this week.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. At his price at this point, if he gets a good game for him, which has been 25 to 30, I would say seems to be about his ceiling right now. That's you certainly are happy. If he gets 30, you're definitely very happy with that. But it still doesn't completely kill you. You can still win a tournament without him, I would say. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you think that that's accurate? If he gets 30 at 6,700, do you need that piece?
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably like to have it, but need it, not necessarily. I mean, need it is when you're getting up around 40, and it's like, okay, well, now I basically have to have this guy to win. 30 is like, especially at 6,700, it's like, sure, I want that on my roster, but you probably have other paths to victory not having him, depending on what else happens on the slate. So, yeah, he would really have to go off to bury you at 6,700, and I just don't know that in this matchup. Again, Kittle playing really makes a difference in my mind for their running game. Like, if Kittle misses again, to me, it's kind of an easy stay away. If Kittle plays, then it's like, okay, well, their running game will probably be pretty effective. So, maybe I do want a little more exposure, but yeah, he's probably not going to kill you at that price.
Yep. And at 6,700, 100 yards and 2 touchdowns would be, and he hasn't been involved in the passing game. That'd be 25 for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So yeah, I agree with you there. So what else on this ownership?
So another thing that stands out to me here, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to find him. I think he's around 8% projected ownership, is Saquon Barkley.
Looking. Yep. Oh, wait.
Is that right for Quan? I think he's around.
Yeah. Actually, right now, he's at 6%.
Oh, sorry, even lower. Okay, he's all the way down there at 6. That stands out to me in a couple of ways. If you look at who has been the best fantasy player so far, and sometimes I think you have to take a step back and try to just say, like, all right, if I'm just looking at this like I've never played fantasy football before, and I wanted to know who's the best player, and I just looked at who has the most fantasy points, this year. If you look at non-quarterback fantasy scoring, I mean, Saquon Barkley is clearly the number one fantasy player in all the land so far this year. So, he's priced at 8,000, which is also, for the number one guy, really not that out of control. If you think about what, like, CMC when he's the number one guy, or what other number one running backs over the years have been. I mean, we routinely see them up into the 9,000 range. So 8,000 for the number one overall fantasy player is really not that crazy. He has a good matchup, against Tampa Bay, and nobody's interested. When you also look at the fact that the receivers are banged up in Philly, those are two of the other people on the long list of injuries, of who maybe or maybe not play. Who's the offense going to run through? I mean, pretty clearly Saquon Barkley. So there's a pretty high confidence interval there that he's gonna have a reasonable game. I mean, I would be shocked if he has less than 15 points. 15 points feels like the total floor to me. With a realistic floor of a game that you're not even happy with is probably 20 points. And then the chances that he gets, 30 plus are, I think, as good as anyone. But the real interesting part of his ownership here to me is just that it's so low. I mean, 6%. I thought it was 8%, but sub 10% ownership. You don't see that a whole lot on the guy who is the number one overall fantasy player through 3 weeks that isn't even priced, at 9.6 or 9.7K or something, where it's okay, well, he is a ton. I think that's a little bit of an oversight by the field, in my initial look there.
Yeah, I actually was thinking that Saquon would be more highly owned than Breece Hall. Breece Hall coming in right now at 17%. So yeah, I agree with you there. Anything else before we jump into DraftKings, the lobby here?
Yeah, the one other thing I'll say, and I don't know if this will change, is Brian Robinson Jr. being 12%. That's really modest if Eckler's out, which I think Eckler was actually totally ruled out yesterday.
Yeah, so he's been ruled out. He's out.
Totally ruled out. So he's out. I think 12% is really modest ownership there. If that, I mean, I hope that's the case because I'll have a lot of Brian Robinson. But if he soaks up now even 80%, there's a chance it ends up being a 90% type situation. But even if he gets 80% and they use McNichols, as a change of pace guy, the Commanders' offense has produced really good cumulative running back scores. It's just split between two guys. So you basically have Eckler and Robinson getting, 10, 15 points a week. If it's all one guy, then I think he makes a lot of sense. And I'm surprised people haven't reacted more to that injury news and see his ownership go up higher than that. Maybe we will.
Yeah, no, agree with you there. Again, I think Robinson Jr. is in a great spot. So let's jump into DraftKings here. And as we always do, we're going to attack the Millionaire.
Large field.
Yes, large field. I'll just say real quick, a couple people, one person asked in the comments this little extension that I have here where it shows you the margin of a contest and the overlay as well. And then if you come in to enter this, you can also go into full contest details and it will show you, let's see if it'll pop up. Normally it shows you the amount of the prize pool that goes to first and then top 10 percentage as well. That's a Rotogrinders extension. I have had it for years. And if you just go to research, if you Google Rotogrinders Chrome extension, you can just log. You have to have a Rotogrinders free account, log into there, and then it'll just populate on the DraftKings site. Kind of a nice tool to have. So, but Papy, with that, where do you want to start on this? Again, we're building for the Millionaire, so this is a huge field contest, and you got to be willing to take some chances on maybe some game environments or spots that are maybe less of a percentage chance than the highest percentage chance games that people are targeting, or just build your lineup in a unique way. But that's the goal here, obviously, is you're shooting for first in this massive contest.
Yeah, and so we're going to do something unique here, and it's something that I wrote about doing in a couple of large field lineups in my write-up in the Edge for the Denver and Jets game for a Broncos.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going here.
Yeah, something that I wrote about doing, and I am going to play a couple of lineups like this. Maybe even this one I'm going to do here will end up being it because I kind of like it. So we're going to start with quarterback Bo Nix, and Bo Nix, man, he's projected to be under 1% owned, so nobody wants Bo. Nobody knows Bo, right? And that's interesting that he's that low. I would expect him to be low. I mean, it's a low total game, and he's Bo Nix, but He has been running more than I think people realize. He's actually posted 3 decent running lines. I mean,
Yeah.
and 2 rushing touchdowns. So that type of rushing production, we know gives you a floor as a quarterback. And when you look at the fact that he's priced at 5,100, it's just so cheap. He's played some really good defenses. He played Seattle, who looks like they're going to have a really good defense this year and is 3-0. He's played the Steelers, who are probably going to have the best defense in the league this year. I think they've given up under 10 points a game, and they are 3-0. And then the Bucs, who looked really good their first 2 weeks before losing to the Broncos. So it's not like he's played easy defenses, and he's still managed to basically average around 15 points. His price to me is just so low for a running quarterback. If he puts up 30 yards rushing and a touchdown and throws for 200 and a touchdown, you're really happy with that. And that's not a huge game. And it's very possible. So when you factor in under 1% owned, right, in the Millie Maker, think about sort of Andy Dalton last week, who was so dirt cheap also, didn't have the rushing upside, but just look at what he ended up doing. Quarterbacks can just put up a 20-point game because they're a quarterback. So when you think about a guy priced like this, I think that he makes sense in a large field tournament, in my opinion.
No, yeah, I read your Edge article, and I really agreed with what you were thinking, just because exactly what you just said. So Bo Nix in there at quarterback. Do you want to pair him with someone? And where do you want to go next?
We're going to pair him with Sutton. So we're going to do the stack I talked about in my Edge article. We're going to pair him with Sutton, and then we're also going to use Hall, the Jets running back. So we're really trying to tell the story here of the Jets run all over Denver, which is possible. Their inside linebacker, Alex Singleton, being out is really impactful loss for their run defense. And so could just be a game where Hall has his way with their run defense. And then, Nix and Sutton, they're losing, right? And they're throwing and they're trying to come back. So I think we're telling that story there. And it's a really cheap stack. I mean, Hall cost us a little bit there, but you're playing such a cheap QB, such a cheap receiver, that it's going to save you some salary for other places. So when we look at our next receivers that we want to go with, Michael Wilson for the Cardinals, who's going to be another one of our salary savers here. And there's a couple of cheap guys I think that make sense this week. Wilson, Mooney, Mingo, especially if Johnson were to miss. But I like Wilson. He's in the best game environment. He played a lot of snaps the last couple weeks. He saw 9 targets last week, and he's not going to see 9 targets, every week. But I think it's fair to say 5 to 8 is probably a reasonable projection. And they're going to come against the Commanders, who really their defense is horrible. So, if he puts up a 5 for 60, 5 for 70 line, you'll take it. It's not the best thing in the world, but he'll take it. If he ends up finding the end zone, he could be a nice, price considered piece. So I think he's a good way to get a floor sort of ceiling-ish combination in there. And then Marvin Harrison, if he ends up being more limited by the quad, then, we know right now Wilson could maybe get some more looks. So I think he's overall. And then also McBride, being potentially out with a concussion is the other thing. So if McBride misses, that's going to open up more targets that you have to think Wilson could soak some of those up. So that's why I like Wilson.
Yep, I like it.
All right, at tight end, we're also going to save money. We're going to go with Sqeaky.
Yeah, man. I right now this lineup is setting up for fitting some studs in somewhere. I'm not sure where you're going to go yet, but Mike Sqeaky, 3,500.
Yeah, we're doing another. We're going to go with another cheap guy. Doing the cheap guys first here. He is exposure to the Cincinnati offense. I think that you kind of have to pick your Bengal this week. Do you want to go Chase? Do you want to go Zach Moss? Do you want to go with Sqeaky? I think you need. You could go Higgins too if you want, but I think you need to probably have accounting some way for the Bengals are probably going to score points in that matchup. He's cheap. He's seen decent target volume. He's just sort of that $3,500 tight end who gives you a little bit of floor, could give you some ceiling, fits in nicely. And now we'll go ahead and we'll go to defense before we put in some of the higher price guys here. And in defense, we're going to go with the Texans.
Okay. Yep. Jacksonville. Attacking Jacksonville. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, the Texans are at home. Jacksonville's offensive line, I think, is ranked 30th by PFF. They're not very good. They haven't really been able to block anybody. The Texans have been reasonably good on defense. They've gotten pressure. I think that Jacksonville's going to give up a lot of sacks in this game. So I think the Texans defense makes sense. And now we get to some of our high price guys. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to build sort of a mini correlation in the Eagles game. And the guy we talked about earlier, Saquon Barkley, we're going to go ahead and bring him in.
Yep. Yeah, I like that construction too, because probably people are not going to be doing the double studs at running back, Hall and Barkley stacked together. So I think that already makes your build very unique.
Yeah, so when you have the Bo Nix at quarterback, you know that you're going to be able to do, something a little bit different. And I think this lineup, what that was putting in the two big running backs together. And when we look at Barkley's overall ownership, if it ends up being sub 10%, which I think it will be, he's going to make the roster almost unique on his own. But I mean, when you figure you're playing Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton, who are going to be sub 2% ownership, it's a really unique overall roster. And then we're going to put in Mike Evans on the Tampa Bay side. And it's interesting because Evans, again, is projected for very low ownership. I think he's projected for, again, sub 10% ownership. And he was a bit of a squeaky wheel. I mean, not publicly because Evan doesn't do that. But there was coach speak coming out of Tampa about we have to get Evans more involved. And he's on pace for, I think, 85 targets, which would be the least of, I don't know, in a long time, maybe his whole career, but a long time. He always gets 100 targets. And he always has 1,000 yards, which he's not on pace for either. So, wouldn't shock me if behind the scenes maybe Evans said something like, I think if you look at it, look how many targets Evans has had this year. It's not many.
Wow. Yeah, that's really low.
Yeah, look at that. So not many targets for Evans so far this year. So wouldn't shock me if maybe behind the scenes there was a little, hey, let me get a little bit of this too. And again, it's a good matchup. I think that the pairing with Barkley on opposite sides of the ball, saying if that game gets there, maybe these guys both have 30 pointers. Is a nice thing to do. And then when we go to the flex spot, this is where we're going to play Brian Robinson Jr. So we're going to go with a 3 running back lineup, which is another way to make this a little bit unique. Also does create a little bit of a correlation in the Washington-Arizona game, getting somebody on both sides of the highest total game there. And again, he just makes so much sense. We talked about him a little bit earlier when I looked at ownership. If Eckler is out, I can't imagine he will be below 20% owned. I really would be surprised if he is, but maybe he will be. And if he ends up even at 20% owned, I'm still very interested in getting a guy who will probably play 75+% of the snaps in a great matchup with a receiving role and a running role. So I think this is a way to really be unique. I don't think you're going to see those 3 running backs together because of what they cost very often. And you still have a high-priced receiver in there and Evans who, could have a big game. And you're just hoping that, Nix finds his way to a rushing touchdown and, a passing touchdown to Sutton. And that's, if you get that, I think this lineup has a lot of potential.
Oh, for sure. You're looking at, if you get that Denver pairing working out, then this lineup suddenly becomes very, very dangerous for, a top finish. What was I going to say? The other thing that I really like is I just love the squeaky wheel narrative. Maybe it's an oversight in my process, but I feel like, there's just been so many times where a receiver has either publicly or there's been coach speak saying we need to get this guy the ball, and the team comes out with a real focus on just peppering that player with targets. Even last night, CeeDee Lamb, he made a big stink on the sideline in last week's loss to Baltimore. And I feel like Dallas is in the first half, Dak was just looking to CeeDee Lamb and throwing him the ball as often as possible. And then you always have the chance for a broken play where, Evans, gets a touchdown or two. And he had 2 touchdowns actually in week 1 on just 6 targets. So I love that. I love the squeaky wheel narrative and just feel like, that has to work out at least 60% of the time. It works, every time. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that because I feel like that's like 100%. I mean, that's not, it isn't 100%, but I feel like it's every time that you see this type of a situation, it's like, all right, they come out and they try, they pepper him, just to get him involved. And I think something we forget is that this game is played by human beings. Yes. We're always looking at them as names and stats and, it's like you're playing a video game all the time. But they are just human beings. And so when somebody gets, irritated as a person, they go say to the coach, like, hey, get me involved. And when it's a guy that's Evans or a big name guy who you want to be happy, like the coach has to respond to that and say like, well, we're going to get him the ball because like, if you don't, it's not just like a Madden player who just goes back into the closet at the end of the night, and then pops out and tries to play. It's like, it's a real person every day and in practice in the meetings that's disgruntled. Like you kind of do have to respond to that.
Yes, exactly. No, I love that point. It's so true. This is a game played by humans, and you don't want one of your best players and really, a perennially great receiver to suddenly be thinking, maybe I just need to go find a new team, that kind of thing. So absolutely, man. Anything else you want to, just closing thoughts, anything else you want to add before we ship this?
No, I mean, I think it's going to be a good week. It's interesting because it's a very low total overall week. There's only really the one game that has a desirable total. I think these weeks are kind of fun. You have to hunt a little more, be a little more willing to take a risk in some low total bad game environments. So, and hopefully it's not a week like the last two where it was just one guy goes so bonkers that you have to have that guy. I mean, I never really love those weeks because you just feel like, well, did I have this guy or not? And that's like, you work all this preparation all week and it's like, well, did I have this one guy? So hopefully this isn't another one of those.
I couldn't agree with you more. Papy, thanks for the lineup building and thanks for joining us on the show, guys. Again, thanks for being with us all week. We'll talk to you next week. Monday's show will feature Xandamir. We'll be talking Showdown. Have a good weekend and see you at the top of the leaderboard. See you, Papy.